Hello, everybody, and welcome back to our study of the Screwtape Letters. We've been moving through these pretty decently good, actually, and it's been a really, really good study. So we're going to go ahead and pick back up today. We are currently on letter number 9. Should be up on the screen for you guys if you want to follow along. As always, I kind of go through this every time, but just to touch base, keep in mind these are letters written from the point of view of a demon to his nephew who is trying to waylay a newborn Christian. So this is essentially tackling a lot of the things that demons will try to do to trip you up or manipulate you. Also keep in mind all the terminology is, of course, from the point of view of a demon. So, for example, when it says the patient, it's referring to the newborn Christian. When it says the enemy, it's referring to God. But yeah, we're just going to go through this. We're going to try to pick it apart a little bit and hopefully get just a little bit more than the surface reading, if God willing. And as always, as I go through this, if you're with us live or if you're watching on YouTube afterwards, go ahead and leave your comments. Love to hear what you guys think. Even if you think I'm totally wrong, even if you think I'm absolutely out of my mind, love to hear it. So, I'm going to go ahead and pick up here. My dear Wormwood, I hope my last letter has convinced you through the trough of dullness or dryness which your patient is going through at present will not, of itself, give you his soul. A lot of the last letter was spent really talking about periods of trial and struggle and how that can actually drive you towards God because you have so little reliance left on yourself. But it needs to be properly exploited. What forms the exploitation should take, I will now consider. In the first place, I have always found that the trough periods of human undulation provide an excellent opportunity for all sensual temptations, particularly those of sex. I love that Lewis does not hold back on that at all. He dives right on into it. Yeah, lust and sexual temptations are probably one of the devil's favorite go-tos during those periods of tribulation because you already feel so crummy that becomes much harder to resist because that temptation then is of an immediate hit. Or at least in your mind at that point, it's an immediate hit of pleasure and dopamine. It's not actually going to give you that. It's actually going to immediately be followed by a period of regret and shame, as it almost always is. But whenever you're in that trough period, it's much harder to think the extra step ahead. So lust is one of those that is definitely a tool the devil loves to use during those periods. This may surprise you, because, of course, there is more physical energy, and therefore more potential appetite at peak periods. But you must remember that the powers of resistance are then also at their highest. Mind you, when he says the powers of resistance, he's speaking of God's protection around you, which of course is at its highest during your peak periods. It's at its ultimate then, and the demons have a much harder time affecting you because you're in line with the Spirit. When you're in line with the Spirit, when you're walking with God, everything then is a much cleaner transition for you. It's during those low periods, those valleys, the troughs, that you're actually far more susceptible to demonic attack. And that's why you have to be so much more wary during those times. But you must remember that the powers of resistance then are also at their highest. The health and spirits which you want to use in producing lust can also, alas, be very easily used for work or play, or thought, or innocuous merriment. Sorry, Lewis has a slightly older way of speaking. Every once in a while, he's stymies even me. But yeah, no, that's very true, because lust ultimately is imagination. It's a form of play. It's a perverted form of play, because it's Satan's twist on the idea. But ultimately, there is an innocence in fantasy and in imagination that is actually a very good thing. It actually can help you deal with a lot of struggle, but you do have to beware because that can very easily turn into lust and into greed and envy. The attack has a much better chance of success when the man's whole inner world is drab and cold and empty. And it is also to be noted that the trough sexuality is subtly different in quality from that of the peak. much less likely to lead to the milk and water phenomenon, which humans call being in love. And that's very true. The temptation of lust that comes from being in love is a different feeling to the pure sexual drive that comes in your valleys. Now that's not to say either one is a good thing. They are both a form of lust and both an evil, but they are different. And the one that comes from that valley, that trough, is actually a meaner sorry, not a meaner, meaner lust, I would say. It's something that's far more base, it's far more id in its nature, even though both are very, very dark inclinations. Much more easily drawn to perversions, much less contaminated by those generous and imaginative and even spiritual contaminants, which often render human sexuality so disappointing. Mind you, again, this is speaking from the point of view of demons. They find it disappointing when our sexuality is strictly with our partner, right? When it's strictly with your spouse, they find that the most disappointing, because then it's used as a form of bonding, it's used as a form of love. I went into detail a little bit about that on an earlier letter, that whenever you are sexual with your spouse, it's something that binds the two of you and helps you smooth roads in your marriage. Whenever it's with a romantic partner that you're not married to, or even just somebody that you're not romantically inclined to at all, then it is something that can blind you and make you less aware of the person that you're with, and ultimately can set you up for a lot more pain. It is the same with other desires of the flesh. You are much more likely to make your man a sound drunkard by pressing drink on him as an anodyne when he is dull and weary, than by encouraging him to use it as a means of merriment among his friends when he is happy and expansive. Never forget that when we are dealing with pleasure in its healthy and normal and satisfying forms, we are, in a sense, on the enemy's ground. Which is true. God does encourage merriment. He encourages happiness in times of celebration whenever, we are among brethren. Now, that's never to be given in excess. That's never to be given to the point of foolishness or drunkenness or lust or perversion. But merriment in a pure form is something God encourages. It's something he wants for us whenever we are amongst those we can be safe with. I know we have won many a soul through pleasure. All the same, it is his invention, his meaning God's, not ours. He made the pleasures. All our research so far has not enabled us to produce one. That leads me to one of my favorite quotes that is often attributed to Tolkien, though I don't believe it's originally his, which is that evil cannot create. It can only pervert and destroy what good things have made. Because all that is good is God. And God is the only one who's truly capable of creation. The Word is creation, and God is creation. Satan can only copy creation. And he does it by perverting what has been created. That's the reason why Tolkien had so much of the belief structure he has about the way the orcs come about in his world. Which that's a whole other, that's a whole other conversation we can get into it a whole other day. But point being, both he and Lewis subscribe to this idea that Satan cannot truly create anything. And I would agree with that. He doesn't actually create. He just perverts, he twists, he destroys. All we can do is encourage the humans to take the pleasures which our enemy has produced, at times, or in ways, or in degrees, which he has forbidden. Hence, we always try to work away from the natural condition of any pleasure to that in which it is least natural, least redolent of its maker, and least pleasurable. And that's kind of an interesting idea, that demons take pleasures and twist them to where they are in the end least pleasurable. And it's something that most of them kind of do subscribe to the slippery slope mentality. Having wine is a form of merriment, but then becoming drunk is something that ultimately leads to a great deal of discomfort and a great deal of upset. And so It's all a matter of not just moderation, but also the manner in which you're taking it in. If you're going out with the intention to get drunk, that's a very different intention than, hey, I'm going to relax and have a good time with my friends. Um, which is to say nothing of the fact if you're an alcoholic, then don't obviously do that in the first place. But it's all a matter of the way in which you're approaching these things. Sex is kind of the easiest example to use. Sex amongst, again, with a spouse is something that that absolutely should be holy. It should be something that is a form of union and joining and ultimate pleasure, but it can and often is in our world used as a perversion, as something that is destructive, as something that will just split you two further and further apart. Sorry, I haven't had a lot of water today. I'm a little bit dehydrated. An ever increasing craving for an ever diminishing pleasure is the formula. Um, Actually, I like that line too because it reminds me of the effect of drugs. Whenever you start to build up an immunity to it, so in order to get the same effect, you have to double the quota and then double that and then double that and so on and so on and so on. That's kind of what Lewis is referring to here. That idea that pleasures too diminish over time, and that's why you have to increase the pleasure. And again, lust is such an easy one to pick out the example of. That's why people's perversions oftentimes will grow more extreme as time goes on, as they are left in that loneliness, because they're no longer getting the same hit of pleasure from it, and so it has to be increased. And of course, that can be very dangerous depending on the person and the area in which they head. But that's why lust is so dangerous, because again, there's no person attached to it, there's no bonding, there's no union in it, and all you have is the experience. And when the experience is no longer bringing you that pleasure, that's whenever it starts to have to grow and increase in that way. It is more certain, and it's better style, to get the man's soul and give him nothing in return. That is what truly gladdens our Father's heart. Mind you, again, demons, so our Father is Satan. And the troughs are the time for beginning the process. But there's an even better way of exploiting the trough. I mean through the patient's own thoughts about it. As always, the first step is to keep knowledge out of his mind. Do not let him suspect the law of undulation. Lewis spoke more about that in the previous letter. Undulation is just the idea of constant movement. You are never truly still. You are either moving towards God or you're moving away from him, and that's a natural aspect of life. You are going to have the swing when you're totally in the spirit, and then once you've completed the work or whatever moment you're in, you're going to swing back the other way. That's not saying that you've screwed up. You're experiencing the flow of life in that regard. No one except the Christ can just remain permanently in the spirit. We are still flesh, we are still humanly, and that will battle against the spirit for all our days. Let him assume that the first Andors, that's an interesting word, arbiters? Don't know that one off the top of my head. Lewis has a very robust vocabulary. Okay, enthusiasm or passion. So let him assume that the first passion of his conversion might have been expected to last, or ought to have lasted, forever, and that his present dryness is an equally permanent condition. We just hit on that a little bit, because so many people, when they first convert, when they first come to God, they have the pouring of the Spirit over them, and they feel that extreme enlightenment. And whenever that feeling doesn't persist to the next day, they can even feel guilty about it, as if they've done something wrong. Whenever they don't understand that it was a moment of stepping into the Spirit, and that unless you're going to continue to pursue it, you're going to step out of it. And then they assume that the dryness afterwards is all there is now because the good feeling is left, rather than understanding it as a circular motion. At least if you're continuing to walk towards Christ, it is. You will constantly be stepping into the Spirit, and then you will feel the diminishment, and then you will step into the Spirit again, and then you will feel the diminishment. That's just the flow of life. Having once got this misconception well fixed in his head, you may then proceed in various ways. It all depends on whether your man is the despising type who can be tempted to despair, or of the wishful thinking type who can be assured that all is well. The former type is getting rare amongst humans. If your patient should belong to it, everything is easy. You have only got to keep him out of the experienced Christian, an easy task nowadays, to direct his attention to appropriate passages in Scripture, and then set him to work on the desperate design of recovering his own feelings by sheer willpower, and the game is ours. Now, that was a lot there, but we'll break that down. Basically saying that for those people that are predisposed towards despair in their heart, and I just talked about that a little bit, the trick demons will use is they will direct you to the passages in Scripture and let you kind of be blind to some of them, so that the impression you come away with is that by sheer power of will, you're going to overcome that dryness in the spirit, which is not how that works. Willpower is a part of it, but it's not by your will, it's by God's will. You have to commit to him, you have to meditate with him, you have to learn to speak to him, you have to pray to him, you have to be in the Scripture, you have to be in the spirit, and you have to learn to practice all of that to step back into the spirit, because that's how you're going to step into God's will. You can't just will yourself into that utter completeness and happiness. And when you think about it logically, it's absurd to think that you ever could. You didn't get yourself there in the first place. If he is of the more hopeful type, your job is to make him acquiesce in the presence of low temperature of his spirit, and gradually become content with him, persuading himself that it's not so low after all. In a week or two, you will be making him doubt whether the first days of his Christianity were not perhaps a little excessive. Talk to him about moderation in all things. And how often do we see that? People view Christians truly drenched in the spirit as extremists, or as people that are they'll often accuse of faking the overwhelming emotions in those moments. But the reality is that's what the pouring of the Spirit is. It makes you go from a academic perspective, you go a little bit insane, and you see things in a way that are a little bit insane. Now, obviously, there's the correct type of insanity, if we can call it that. I'm not pointing to any form of religious extremism, if we want to call it that. But to be drenched in the Spirit is something that will make you a little bit insane. And if you let the pragmatic, worldly demons speak in your ear, they'll tell you, yeah, that was a little silly, wasn't it? That was a little ridiculous that you were crying in the middle of a service and feeling the Spirit around you. That's not the way the world really works. You were just a little bit caught up in it. If you can once get him to the point of thinking that religion is all well and good up to a point, you can feel quite happy about his soul. A moderated religion is as good for us as no religion at all, and more amusing. That's something that is so important to take note of. I've spoken before, and I will always, about how you can't let religion supersede your spirituality, but to replace your spirituality with a muted religion is something that is a wide trap in the Western Church in particular. These are the people, hey, I go to service or mass on Sundays, therefore I'm a Christian. Okay, well, does it actually affect your life? Do you actually put anything into practice? Do you even tithe? Do you, give to any ministry, or do you serve anywhere? Well, no, I go to church. That's my service. Well, okay, you're not gaining anything there. You're not actually growing, and you're not providing a benefit. Said with love, obviously. I'm not saying that's just beat down on people. Like, we've all been there. I've been there. That's a step in the journey. But if you fool yourself into thinking that that's the end, then you'll get stuck there, and you will never grow, and you will feel frustrated, and you will feel like, man, I don't know how everyone else seems to be progressing whenever I'm not moving. Well, it's because you stopped seeking. There is an endless water that we're wading into. I should say virtually endless, practically endless. Christ, of course, walked in it in its entirety, but as we're not capable of that because we are not fully God, we're never going to reach that level of depth. We're not going to get anywhere close to it. But there is always another step. There is no point at which you're going to reach all Christianity ever has for you. You're just going to get as far as you're going to get in this life. Another possibility of that direct attack on his faith, is that of a direct attack on his faith. When you have caused him to assume that the troth is permanent, can you not persuade him that his religious phase is just going to die away like all his previous phases? Of course, there is no conceivable way of getting by reason from the proposition I am losing interest in this to the proposition this is false. So he's basically saying that just because somebody is feeling muted in their spirit, you're not going to get them to say, well, there is no God. But as I have said before, it is jargon, not reason, you must rely on. The mere word phase will very likely do the trick. I can assume that the creature has been through several of them before. They all have. And that he always feels superior and patronizing to the phases he has emerged from. Not because he has really criticized them, but because they are in the past. You may keep him well fed on hazy ideas of progress and development and the historical point of view, I trust, and give him lots of modern biographies to read. The people in them are always emerging from phases, aren't they? You see the idea. Keep his mind off of the plain antithesis between true and false. Nice, shadowy expressions. It was a phase. I've been through all that. And don't forget the blessed word, adolescent. Your affectionate Uncle Screwtape. This is definitely one of those letters that I think is vital for everyone to read, especially whenever you're in one of the troths yourself. Because you need to understand how often what we consider to be the natural mindset is truly a demonic implemented one. Sorry, excuse me just a moment. Apologies, I have allergies getting me a little bit. But yeah, what we often consider to be a natural mindset, just like he's saying throughout this letter, the idea of this just being a phase, of this just being a part of my life. Well, yeah, that used to be, but it's not really anymore. That mindset will drag you down so damn fast. And it is a hard one to break out of, because it's something that pragmatically, from an earthly logic, from an earthly reason, makes total sense. And the problem whenever you begin examining your spiritual life with a pragmatic reason is that you're looking at it through one less dimension than you need to actually understand it. It's just like trying to examine a three-dimensional object with only two dimensions. You are never going to grasp the full picture. You might grasp some of it, and if you're clever enough, you might understand some of what you're missing, but you're not actually going to understand it. You're not going to see it. And that's why that's so vital, to keep that spiritual understanding. So yeah, it's only a phase if you start thinking of it that way. And it's not, and that's exactly what the Bible warns against. It's not to be a phase. It's a changing of your life. You know, it's not a phase that I have dark hair. I could hypothetically dye it, but just as far as having my natural hair, that's not a phase. That's just something that happened as I grew older. My hair turned darker, and that's just the way it is now. Again, without having dyes or anything done to it. Well, that's kind of the way in which we're to be Christian. It's not something that was an idea. It didn't happen at one point. Now it's not happening. You've made a commitment in your heart, and you're turning that over. So we're going to go ahead and move on into letter 10. I forget exactly how many of these are. I think 27, if memory serves. We'll get to the end sooner or later, but just, My dear Wormwood, I was delighted to hear from Triptweeze, that's another one of the demons that Lewis has thrown into the story, that your patient has made some very desirable new acquaintances, and that you seem to have used this event in a really promising manner. I gather that the middle-aged married couple who called at his office are just the sort of people we want him to know. Rich, smart, superficially intellectual, and brightly skeptical about about everything in the world. I gather they are even vaguely pacifists, not on moral grounds, but from an ingrained habit of belittling anything that concerns the great mass of their fellow man, and from a dash of purely fashionable and literary communism. That's a hell of a statement, Lewis. But yeah, no, talking so often about the people that will come into our lives, it is something that cannot be understated how often the people in your life will influence you, even when you're aware that that's happening, and if you're trying to prevent it. It's one of the reasons why I emphasize that if you are going to battle against the demons that are going to try to keep you down, you need to have a morning communion and prayer with God, because that's the only way you're ever going to manage it, because the world will throw 50 things at you before breakfast and will just try to drag you out of that space. And this is exactly kind of what I mean here when I talk about that. The world will throw people at you. There are people that, may seem, from an earthly academic standpoint, to be wonderful people. They're rich, they're smart, they're intellectuals, they're skeptical about things, they want to learn and study. They're pacifists because, that's just the way that they generally live their lives. But everything in that is superficial. Riches are something that are purely earthly. They're not spiritually enlightened or rich. They're purely monetary rich. And that's something that lives and dies with the world. And it's something that, more often than not, is only going to incite greed. Maybe they're smart, but okay, again, that's an earthly trait. That's not something you give yourself. That's something we take way too much pride in. I've even been guilty of it. To take pride in your intelligence. Well, you didn't give yourself that. Your intelligence is a tool that was given to you to use by God. They're superficially intellectuals, which likely means they have some understanding, but they don't actually study deeply into the things around them. They're pacifists, but not on a moral ground. They're skeptical about things of the world. These are things that many people will tell you is a perfectly reasonable and even healthy and good way to live your life. The problem is these people have nothing in them spiritually. They are a seed that has found no good soil to sprout in. This is excellent. And you seem to have made good use of all his social, sexual, and intellectual vanity. Tell me more. Did he commit himself deeply? I don't mean in words. There is a subtle play of looks and tones and laughs by which a mortal can imply that he is of the same party to those whom he is speaking. That is the kind of betrayal you should simply encourage, because the man does not fully realize it himself, and by the time he does, you will have made withdrawal difficult. That is something that is very easy. If you try to be a person who just goes with the flow, and I totally understand it, because I'm somebody who naturally has some of that in me as well, where you try to just be passive, you can find yourself amongst people who consider you one of theirs when you really don't agree with anything they talk about, but you have a very hard time just kind of pulling out of that without being an asshole. It's just a difficult moment. No doubt, he must very soon realize that his own faith is in direct opposition to the assumptions on which all the conversation of his new friends is based. I don't think that the matters will provide, or sorry, I don't think that the matters much provided. I don't think that the matters much provided. That's an odd way to phrase that sentence. I don't think that the matters much provided that you can persuade him to postpone any open acknowledgement of the fact. And this, with the aid of shame, pride, modesty, and vanity, will be easy to do. That's a hell of a statement. So just to break that down, I believe Lewis is just basically saying that, essentially what you realize that the life you're trying to live as a Christian is so directly in opposition to the people that you're talking to, you'll have a very hard time pulling out. And what your own blindness doesn't do, shame, pride, modesty, and vanity will kind of help fill in, and they will leave you trapped there until you kind of go, well, maybe it's not really a big deal. Yeah, they don't really believe what I do, but it's okay. Yeah, I mean, we don't believe the same things, but it's not really affecting me. And that's something that can actually infect people's marriages. This is why the Bible warned you against being yoked with non-believers. Now, again, I'm not saying you shouldn't be friends with non-believers, but you have to be aware of that going in, and you have to be aware of when you may have to have a point when you say, hey, respectfully, nothing against you, but I gotta take some time away. As long as the postponement lasts, he will be in a false position. He will be silent when he ought to speak and laugh when he ought to be silent. He will assume, at first, only by his manner, but presently by his words, all sorts of cynical and skeptical attitudes, which are not really his. But if you play him well, they may become his. And all mortals tend to turn into the thing they are pretending to be. I will repeat that. And all mortals tend to turn into the thing they are pretending to be. That is something we realize so often. And if you are pretending to fit in with a group of earthly people, you are slowly evolving more into their ways. And eventually you get to the point where you're no longer thinking of it as pretending. You're thinking, well, I'm putting on a bit of a show, but everyone does. No one reveals all of themselves truthfully. And that's exactly the same thing these people are all doing. And that may even be true to a degree, but what you've actually done is shut out what should be an opportunity not only for an example of a spiritual life, but even possibly a little bit of evangelism. If things go well, if their hearts are not closed to God. It's one of the greatest mistakes evangelists make, and it's not always true, but something that can definitely go wrong, is the attempt to reach the spirit before they feel you've heard them as a person, because they still live in a purely physical mindset. And if they feel that you're simply trying to preach down at them, they won't listen to what you're trying to say, even if your intentions are good. That's one of the issues in evangelism, and it's one of the reasons why I always caution evangelists, even though it's a wonderful thing they're doing and they should be doing it. But there's just like kind of a note that has to be taken on with it. But yeah, you can easily get lost in that if you're not careful. The real question is how to prepare for the enemy's, God's, counterattack. The first thing is to delay as long as possible the moment at which he realizes this new pleasure is a temptation. Since the enemy's servants have been preaching about the world as one of the great standard temptations for 2,000 years, which I've been doing throughout this very study over and over, this might seem difficult to do. But fortunately, they have said very little about it for the last few decades. Something which has elongated, really, into even our current age. Let's see, I don't remember. Let's see when these were published. So, okay, yeah, roughly 1940, 1941. Yeah, and that's extended into our current day. So almost nearly another 100 years, not quite that long, but coming up on it. And that's only grown more and more prevalent. The church has grown muted for fear of driving people away. I was actually told yesterday that I am a step or two below the fire and brimstone preacher, which I never really thought of myself as. But apparently my message can be a little bit strong at times. Not that I've ever preached with the intention of making somebody uncomfortable or with the intention of calling anyone out. I've never done that, but I do tend to hit on topics that are difficult. That is my intention, because I believe they're important, especially to people who are believers. But yeah, the church has made a love out of softballing the message, and to a degree, yeah, you can't just come in and dump the full spiritual power on people who have no idea what you're talking about. But you also can go too far in the other extreme, where you soften the message so much that it no longer has any power to it. And it's just a nice little lovely feel-good thing that they absorb and they go home and they instantly forget about. In modern Christian writings, though I see much, indeed more than I would like, about Mammon, I see few of the old warnings about worldly vanities, and the choice of friends, and the value of time, All that your patient would probably classify as Puritanism. And I may remark in passing that the value we have given to that word is one of the really solid triumphs of the last few hundred years. By it, we rescue annually thousands of humans from temperance, chastity, and sobriety of life. So yeah, just take that all in. That's basically just saying, it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier. Every choice you make in your worldly daily life affects you. And if you're not aware of that, if you don't take that on as a battle, it's going to slowly corrupt you. And that's exactly the thing. It's the thing that non-believers or even some believers will look at you and say, well, you're being a Puritan. You're being, an extremist. I've even had friends of mine, I expressed that I would much rather be left from my church than to dull my beliefs and my attitude about God. Essentially saying if my church were teaching falsehoods, if my church was teaching a lightness about God, and that's what they were determined to teach, then I would not much rather not be accepted there. And they warned me against it in the best meaning way. That they had a relative who was similar in that way. But we really are called upon to be like that in that regard. Now, there's a difference between that and beating down on people or looking for a perfect church. That's a whole other extreme. Everything that we're talking about today, you can really go to one extreme or the other. But you're called upon to try to maintain a sanctification of your daily life that doesn't make you one of the world. Sooner or later, however, the real nature of his new friends must become clear to him. And then your tactics must depend on the patient's intelligence. If he is a big enough fool that you can get him to realize the character of his friends only while they are absent, their presence can be made to sweep away all criticism. And that's something that absolutely happens to a lot of people. It's, when they're not around, you stop and you think to yourself, man, they're really not very good for me. But the moment they're there, you forget about it all. Oh, well, this is, hey, fun. Let's have a party. Let's have discussion. Let's do this. Let's do that. And if you only stop and realize how truly destructive they are for you once they're gone, you're essentially playing the same game that an addict does by not being careful enough. It's an easy trap to fall into. I don't belabor anyone that has made that mistake. But it's something you do have to realize, and it's something you have to be aware of. Again, you have to have that battle mindset going in, or it will happen. If this succeeds, he can be induced to live, as I have known many humans live, for quite long periods, 2 parallel lives. He will not only appear to be, but actually be, a different man in each of the circles he frequents. We just talked about that. If you pretend to be something for long enough, you become the thing. Failing this, there is a subtler and more entertaining method. He can be made to take a positive pleasure in the perceptions that the 2 sides of his life are inconsistent. This is done by exploiting his vanity. He can be taught to enjoy kneeling beside the grocer on Sunday just because he remembers that the grocer could not possibly understand the urban and mocking world which he inhabited on Saturday evening. And contrariwise, to enjoy the bawdy and blasphemy over the coffee of these admirable friends all the more because he is aware of a deeper spiritual world within him that they cannot understand. And this is when you get into the idea of personal glorification. The moment that it is a personal, not a godly glorification, you've moved something in the way of that spiritual connection and you are instantly falling away. I talked about this a little bit, I believe it was in my last video, about how it's difficult once you've delivered a message because people want to congratulate you, which is a wonderful thought, but it's something that if you're not careful, it becomes a personal aggrandizement, and it's not meant to be. It's meant to aggrandize the Lord, first, foremost, third. You're not really supposed to be in it. And if you reach the stage that Lewis is talking here, where your spiritual understanding or your understanding of the world, either one, is a personal glorification, you are absolutely in trouble. And you really, really need to get right with God. That, mind you, I'm not saying that to like beat down on anybody. I've just said I don't do that. But it's something you need to be aware of, and it's something that you need to be aware of the true danger that lies in that. You see the idea. The worldly friends touch him on one side and the grocer on the other. And he is the complete, balanced, complex man who sees round them all. Thus, while being permanently treacherous to at least two sets of people, he will feel, instead of shame, a continual undercurrent of self-satisfaction. Finally, if all else fails, you could persuade him in the defiance of conscience to continue the new acquaintance on the ground that he is, in some unspecified way, doing these people good by the mere act of drinking their cocktails and laughing at their jokes. That it would cease to do would be, and that to cease to do so would be priggish, intolerant, and of course, puritanical. Well, hey, I mean, how often do we have, talks of people being bigots, intolerant, religious Puritans because they refuse to accept certain lifestyles? That hasn't gone anywhere. It's only increased in the last, 80 years since this has been written. Meanwhile, you will, of course, take the obvious precaution of seeing that this new development induces him to spend more than he can afford and to neglect his work with his mother. Her jealousy and alarm, his increasing evasiveness or rudeness, will be invaluable for the aggravation of domestic tension. Your affectionate Uncle Screwtape. So yeah, it's something that happens too often. Because we do live in the world, but we're not of the world, it can be very difficult to then interact with the world. And that flesh is always going to be battling against that spirit. And that's why I warn you again and again and again and again, you have to be aware going in. You can't tackle that as it comes up. You have to prepare beforehand. You have to pray for the armor. You have to pray for that cloak of protection around you. You have to pray to be cleansed of the earthly demons and spirits that will infect you. Otherwise, they will win that battle every single time. I don't know anyone that is capable of fighting it if they only think about it as the problem comes up. But that's where we're going to go ahead and draw things to a close for the day. Hope you guys got something out of it. I hope there was some form of enlightenment that came to you. And that is all for this time. So I will see you guys next time. I love you.